Being Singaporean to me means
When I'm abroad or when people hear you're Singaporean, the perceptions I think I've had is really that, oh, we can be a bit boring. But I'd like to think I've definitely changed that stereotype with personal example.
You get this question like, wow, is Singapore really like what you see in Crazy Rich Asians? And I'm just like,
When I say I'm Singaporean, I get comments on caning, chewing gum, no littering, and maybe the most annoying one would be poor imitations of Singlish.
One of the most common answers I get from when I tell them I'm Singaporean is, oh, where did you learn how to speak English so well? Like, the main thing I looked forward to when I came back was the food. I miss all the great hawker food when I was overseas. Like, I went to bed dreaming about hawker food in the cold winter nights. Like, man, I wish I had my char kway teow. I went to Seattle in 2016. So I started out as an intern for Kenlis Restaurant, which is a very old fine dining restaurant. It's been around for over 70 years now. And then they offered me a full-time job, which I took, and spent another 3.5 years there. I came back to Singapore in June of 2020. That was like the height of COVID in Singapore and in the States. Because, well, my contract was already ended. The day before I left Seattle, they were having a Black Lives Matter protest on the streets. I needed a sense of stability at that point. Restaurants all around were closed. Everyone was pivoting, and even my restaurants had trouble. So coming back was probably the most sensible thing to do at that time. So when I came back, I think it was the first night I had my stay-home notice. I quickly signed up for Grab and ordered char kway teow from different tastes, which was my favorite taste to get, char kway teow. So we went into phase 2, I think it was mid-June, and they allowed dining in at restaurants. The first one I went to was Bedok 85. That place has so much memories for me. I think at least once a week, my family and I would go and patronize the hawker center. The thing about hawker centers, I think, is that it's so communal. You could sit down with a whole family and hey, is the seat taken? Can I sit down here? And yeah, why not? You strike up conversation. If you find someone overseas who is a Singaporean, and then you start talking about, hey, what's your favorite hawker center? Oh, you get a big debate. That debate surprisingly connects people. When I was overseas, I actually try to celebrate Singaporean holidays. I would always take a week or two off for Chinese New Year. Although I didn't have a family there, I had an adopted family, and I would teach them how to play mahjong, how to cook steamboat, what was the reunion dinner. Other than that, there was National Day that I was also quite proud of. I don't know why. I was never enthusiastic about National Day in Singapore until I was overseas. So I would listen to National Day songs on Spotify and get nostalgic. I also cook food that was nostalgic to me. So when I come back to Singapore, and my mom will pack laksa paste for me or curry paste for me, and I'll go back and I'll store it in the freezer. And when it's cold, when it's rainy in Seattle, and I feel like I need a bowl of laksa now, I would defrost it, whip it up, have a bowl of laksa, and it'll be the most comforting feeling I've ever had.
Okay, now it's okay.
Oh yeah? I remember my mom making curry since I was a kid. You have to make your rempah, and then you have to cook the rempah down, and then you add in your ingredients.
Actually, if you want to cook, you actually cook a lot now. You blend a lot more and keep in the fridge.
I was overseas making my mom's chicken curry. It made me happy cooking for my colleagues, and them enjoying it is unbridled joy for me. Yeah.
You can put more.
You are what you eat, you know. Your memories are tied to an emotion you get when you eat your favorite chicken rice, your favorite char kway teow, even your favorite hamburger. That raw emotion, it's so difficult to replicate. The only way to do it is through the same avenue that you got it. So that's just tied with your identity. You know, it's so hard to change. So what I put on plate is essentially my personality on the plate. Everything I've experienced in life will somehow or another end up on my dishes. And my identity and my culture are the backbone of my cuisine. I never really appreciated wet markets as a kid. I thought they were gross. I thought that you gotta wear like rain boots when you go in there. And I never liked the smell because it smelled of dead fish. Coming back from the States, realizing that this is what food is. There's no getting away from it. And if you want a personal connection with your supplier, with your fishmonger, that's the only way you can get it, because the supermarkets are not going to give you that connection. So having this connection with like a fishmonger, your chicken seller, I think is one of the most underrated relationships to nurture. Just because they're handling your food, you always want to have a good relationship with someone who handles your food. Just putting it out there. Going through the wet market to find products and then having recommendations from the stall owner tell me, hey, you should cook this vegetable in a certain way. And I'm like, okay, I'll look into that. I'll try to translate it into my dishes as well. And that's the very root of what I do. Sometimes you'll find crazy products like you've never seen and you don't even know the name of it. Sometimes the stall owner doesn't even know the name. They just sell it to you. I like to incorporate local ingredients into my food and underrated ingredients as well. Things that people would have never thought, like, wow, I never knew that you could use that in that. This xiao bai cai is actually a very versatile vegetable. You can use it in a multitude of ways. And it costs $1 a packet. A very simple way of doing xiao bai cai differently is to grill it. So you would cut it in half, dress in a bit of canola oil, a bit of salt, and then in a very hot pan, you just sear it. Just when the leaves start to wilt, you take it off and then throw some lemon juice or some soy sauce on it, some fish sauce, and then just serve it up. It's as simple as that. So my plans now are to open up a private dining event space where I'll be the resident chef preparing tasting style menus for guests. Fresh tiger paws, king oyster mushroom, and finish off with mushroom garlic. It's going to be a laid-back affair and showcasing local ingredients, which I think is a big thing that I think that we all need to do better of. Singaporeans have become foodies, and we all want to know more about where our food comes from, how it was prepared, and I think being in a private dining setting gives the chef and diners that connection. I think the real mark of a chef isn't in the expensive value of the product. It's in the value of turning something that people would normally turn a blind eye to how they are going to recapture the imagination of themselves and their diners into seeing the product in a new light. Being overseas for so long has made me miss a lot of life events of my family, major milestones that I think I would have loved to have been here to see. I'm really happy being back so that I can experience more of these life moments with them. Seeing the stability and security that I could have in Singapore, the sense that I'm safe and that my family is safe, I think that's really what all of us want to be.
What was Mommy telling you? The water that is flowing out of the Malayan means that it's giving life to the Singapore River. Do you like the Singapore River? I used to tell them stories about how, Singapore was a fishing village. It's something that my daughter cannot fathom. During the process of sharing with them about Singapore, that sense of pride comes in, that sense of belonging actually comes in. Hi, Papa! We miss you! Guess where we are today? We are at the Malayan!
Wow, that's your favorite place, right?
We'll see you soon! In 2008, I left Singapore to pursue my studies in Malaysia. And it was where I met my husband. My husband is Pakistani. And in 2012, we got married. And then we moved to Pakistan. The main reason we went back was because my husband, being the only son and the eldest of the family, he had to look out for his parents. Actually, coming home to Singapore during this particular COVID-19 period was a very difficult decision to make, actually. My husband was also very worried about me being in Pakistan during that particular period because of medical facilities. At the point, Islamabad was going on full capacities. It was a pretty chaotic scene at that point of time. So coming back to Singapore meant that I had to leave my husband behind. We did not know when we will see him again. Every single day, you're answering that same question. When will Papa come? When are we going to see Papa? It was very painful each time I had to answer that question. It's not often that we get to be in Singapore for a prolonged period. But being back here and being able to make use of the time to foster that sense of identity, I think it has been a very positive experience for my children. So a lot of the time is spent taking them to places, to show them the country and all, the historical sites, be it museums, be it just walking along and telling them stories. All these things that I teach my daughter, it keeps reinforcing in me who I am as a Singaporean. Things which I never thought would come across my mind, or that I would put so much work into being Singaporean. Raising third culture kids, it kind of means that when they're in Singapore, sadly, people may not consider them Singaporeans. When they're in Pakistan, people may not consider them Pakistanis. There was once a cousin told her that you are not Singaporean because you don't live here. And she got very upset. She came to me and she was like, am I not Singaporean? And then I was like, no, of course you are. You are a Singaporean. You were born here. You have a Singapore identity. I've always inculcated it in her that you are Singaporean. You are Singaporean and you are Pakistani. This is bitter gourd. But in Malay, do you know what it's called? Peria. You feel it? This is called peria. Prior to having kids, it never bothered me whether people thought of me as Singaporean or wherever I was in the world, It was only at that point in my life that I realized how important it is that I cling on to that Singaporean root. I started to really think about it, what it actually means to be Singaporean.
Scholars are awarded for achievements in the fields of combat.
To actually instill their Singaporean identity in them, it actually takes a lot of work. So I was making conscious effort with Mariam because I had this constant paranoia that she would not know what it means to be Singaporean. I used to play a lot of national songs actually for her. I used to play Singapore Town, and we used to dance around the room with that song because it's so uplifting.
Chan Mali Chan. Look here lah. Chan Mali Chan. Hoi hoi. Chan Mali Chan. Ketipo payung. Again.
I used to teach her Rasa Sayang, Chan Mali Chan, all these songs which reminds me of my own childhood. I made it a conscious effort to teach her these things. All these things then made me realize that it is not that I'm losing myself by being away, but of course certain things you still need to constantly reinforce, like especially the language component. Mariam, what are you drawing? Kucing. Okay, now who can tell me what's cat in Urdu?
Me. I don't know anything.
Billy. In Pakistan, I teach her, I remind her, of the names of the stuff in Malay, words in Malay. I spend so much time trying to teach her Malay, but she won't use it with me. If I use it with her, she'll tell me that, no, speak English to me. Is it? I have this tendency of asking my kids before bedtime, like, who loves me? So sometimes I ask it in Malay, but they will always answer me in English. It was strange that one night when I asked that, and then my older girl was like, "Saya sayang mami." And I'm like, what? What did you just say? And then after that, then she started blushing. When she spoke Malay to me, it hit me how something which I never thought was an identity factor became an identity factor for me. My ability to speak Malay was an identity of mine, which I never once thought that it was. It's funny because these are things that you never think about. I think if I didn't have kids, I wouldn't put any thought into it at all. I really wouldn't. I would just take it as it is. This was Mummy's favorite. What is this? This is called 5 stones. In Malay, it's called batu serembat. When you have children, during the process of actually sharing with them or talking to them about Singapore, that's where that feeling of pride to being Singaporean comes in.
Oh, what happened to yours?
It is amazing to see how the kids enjoy cuisines from both background. At one point in Mariam's life, she was geared more towards Singaporean food. In fact, whenever she went back to Pakistan, I actually had to prepare the local food for her. She wants things like chicken rice and soup, and that's not exactly a staple in Pakistan. She was always asking for nasi goreng and all these local dishes.
Good.
Yeah, that you eat. So I used to have to prepare. I used to have to bring back certain spices and stuff just to make sure I was able to cook over there. And now that she's here, she is having her local food, but she misses Pakistani biryani, So she will then request for Pakistani biryani, that she wants biryani. So it's funny to see her finding comfort in certain types of food when she's in the different countries that she's in. It's funny how food actually builds a sense of identity. Is it yummy?
Is it nice? Slice the onion.
Slice, chop, dice.
Slice.
I learn when she cook, I just
When I cook over there, it most definitely reminds me of home, especially when the aroma hits you.
There are specific aromas which triggers and makes you really, really, really miss home. You just like sit down and just like, oh man, I really want to go back home. Food is something that passes down heritage. My mom's cooking is based on her grandmother's cooking. I want to be able to cook what she makes, and I would like my children to also carry on that lineage. So after 4.5 months, my husband flew into Singapore and he was quarantined. So it was very difficult for them to bear through that 2 weeks that he was in quarantine. When he finally came out of quarantine, they were so happy. They had like prepared cards for him and they were like, it was just like everything was papa, papa, papa. I'm like, yes.
How did that? Who's moving?
Someone is carrying it.
Mommy, what?
So after not seeing them for 4.5 months, it feels good to finally catch up with them. And you know, I missed a few months of them growing up, you see, especially the little one. No, gently, do this. Gently, okay? See, when I came and saw her, she's like a full chatterbox and with a full Singlish accent. The good thing about Singapore is like it's a multicultural environment, you see. Like being exposed to so many cultures, they learn a lot and they're more accepting of people that way.
In Singapore, we have Chinese, we have Malays, we have Indians, you have Eurasians, and it's a melting pot of different identities and races. So it took her a while to understand it. I had to constantly remind her that we are not one homogeneous state. We are different, and every one of us have different identities, different way of talking, different ways of behaving, our different culture.
Okay.
Steamed fish and Singapore changed and now we've become like that.
Now it has been almost half a year that I've been here. Having the chance to actually be here for a prolonged period of time and seeing my daughters embody certain parts of the Singaporean identity in them, I think going back to Pakistan, it would make it easier for me to educate them along the way about their Singaporean identity and stuff because they have lived it, they are understanding it. Being Singaporean is more than just holding the passport or being born to a Singaporean mom or a Singaporean dad or to Singaporean parents for that matter. It's a much deeper understanding or feeling actually. And when you are not in the country, that sense of pride to be Singaporean it plays up, honestly.
You want ice cream?
I did my primary one, Coach 1 Presbyterian Primary School, and what was great was we had a bunch of friends who all lived in the blocks nearby, and we'd all go play in this playground there.
Did you play here all the time?
Yeah, we used to come here all the time, then we'd go to the mini mart to buy chocolates and sweets.
We've been in Singapore for 3 generations, and I lived here until I was 8. And when I was 8, we actually moved to Australia. We would often come back more or less every year, go out with cousins, grandparents for a while before they passed away. And a lot of it was definitely about the makan. But I think much more importantly was the time we spent with the family and family friends. When I finished high school, I had my admission letter to go to law school in the UK. And then a week later, I got my enlistment letter, right? And I'd hoped that I'd be allowed to kind of defer till after I did my law school, then come back and serve, like a bunch of my other friends in Australia had done, where they did the university and came back to serve, but that was not allowed. So I said, you know what? I think it's important to live in alignment with your values, right? Which means you have something to do, you do it. You don't try and siam, you don't try and step life stuff right around. So I said, look, I'll come back and I'll get it done. To me, I think being a Singapore citizen was clear that this is part of what you have to do. And I've always been clear in terms of my principles and the approach I take. So that to me was an easy decision. So I remember when, we go and get shaved and you become botak. That certainly was when I was like, okay, this has really started. Remember, in BMT, I was a kantan, right? A potato, because of my accent, how I spoke. I didn't know what it means, so I had to ask one of my other friends, hey, bro, what is kantan? And then he explained to me, I said, oh, I see. So there were definitely times where it really hit home. So I still remember when we were learning marching commands in Malay, and I would always be turning the wrong direction and then kena push-ups. In many ways, it did make me question what degree of Singaporeanness I was. Was I Singaporean as the soldiers marching next to me?
Are we working on the infrastructure project?
So since NS, I hadn't lived in Singapore for about 10 years. I think in many ways, living overseas in multiple cities, including London, New York, Sydney, Melbourne, amongst others, in working in these different metropolitan centers, you appreciate even more what you're away from. So I think in some ways, actually, if anything, gave me a deeper connection with it, and which is why I was very happy to kind of move back many years later. But to me, it felt natural because of that sense of connection. So I still remember the first day, 23rd of June, 2019. We stayed with my wife's brother. And as my head hit the pillow that night, it struck me that this is now home. So it was quite funny how we met, actually, because both of us through our life had kind of kept intersecting past Singapore, but never been there at the same time.
I was initially born in India. That was the one time we were actually in the same place, was in Melbourne when we were both 8. And then when I was in high school, I moved to Singapore, and I left Singapore was to go back to Melbourne to do university. And that was the time that Sean came here to do his NS.
And then eventually we ended up meeting each other in Melbourne, which is where we then connected and started dating and eventually decided to get married. It was quite interesting because we had two very different experiences of Singapore, right? Because in many ways, mine was what I would say is a more local experience. Tharani was like the expat Singapore experience. But it was fascinating because for me, I'd often share parts and stories from my childhood, the places we used to play as kids, and so on. And for her, this was like a completely different world.
Yeah, it was fascinating. When we lived here, my parents were here for a good 10 years, a very long time. And when we lived here, the expat world is a little bit different. It's unusual. When I came back and I started working at Tan Tock Seng, which is, a local hospital with people that are locals, and became friends with them, I realized that Singapore actually has two very separate worlds. One is the expat world and one is the local world. And now they are starting to mingle and mesh, but 10 years ago, that wasn't so much the case. So it was definitely interesting and fun for me to rediscover Singapore in a very different way.
The taugeh? Yeah, sure.
Coming back was both familiar and different. Familiar in the sense of some places obviously feel kind of the same. So like Tekka Market.
Anything else? I need 2 pieces tofu. Big or medium?
One of the dreaded rituals of my week is when we go to Tekka to do our marketing.
That'll be $19.20.
Great, thank you.
So when I was a small boy, I was traumatized. My mother would bring me and I used to hate the smell of the fish after school. So I'll deliberately say I'm gonna stand outside and I'm not gonna enter. So she'll let me stay at that playground outside. She'll go in, she'll park the car under, do her groceries, and she'll get me and then we'll go back. Then little did I realize, and my mother thought it was very funny, that after I got married, my wife's dragging me along to the same place I thought I'd escaped from.
Which are the ones?
These are the ones that normally go on Laksa, right? Yeah. I love going to Tekka because I just love how fresh and green everything is. And it took me a couple of times going there with different aunties to learn which stall is which and who's got the better ingredient for what.
It's interesting, right? Because now we've actually become quite familiar with a lot of them. There is that broader sense of community when you're there. There's that feeling of togetherness, in a way.
Bye, Auntie.
The whole work and my work, but finally made it happen. But good to see you. Take care. See you.
The tekka thing is really like a ritual. We go on the weekend, we go get our vegetables, Indian groceries are all there as well. And then the compromise is that we go to Gokul's for Shan, so he's happy.
I was introduced to Gokul by a couple of my friends in NS at that time. I always, even when I used to come in for work, even if it's like a 24-hour stint, I'll somehow find a way to go to Gokul's in between. So that's been a big part of it for me. But I think the other nice parts as well, Tani, you know, coming to meet my relatives and so on, it's been really nice to kind of have that kind of bonding together. So in some ways, it actually gave me a deeper appreciation for it, bringing Tharani along, because you kind of start to view it with new eyes in many ways.
We both work. Then we come home and, you know, usually we cook enough to last us a few days. That's not...
We often talk about work and catch up on things while we do that.
The work culture here is very different. The language is challenging. I've realized people can't understand my accent very well.
Too chim.
Yeah, I called a patient's son to update him once, and he was like, sorry, cannot understand you. Your English is too chim. And I had to go find out what chim meant because I didn't actually know.
That's all that's sugar?
Yeah.
So much sugar.
So much sugar.
Then how? Huh? You taught me bits of Singlish.
I know.
There were some terms that when I first...
Have you worked out la, lo, and le?
I think so. I think I finally worked at la, lor, and lay, but I think I figured that out. But there were so many terms that people would use, and then I would text him from underneath the table being like, what does this mean? I have no idea.
I think it's just part of, you know, our identity. It's a incredible sort of way that we kind of connect and communicate.
Hey guys!
Hi, Ma. Hi, Papa.
Hi, Bob!
Hi, how are you?
And importantly, I think what I've been really grateful for is that sense of community I felt here, right? Across my family friends, my NS buddies. So I think a lot of that has certainly sort of made this feel so much like home. I mean, the Singapore we live in today and will continue to live in the future is such a diverse place. There is no one Singapore, there is no one Singaporean. And so appreciating that diversity that we have, I think those in many ways to me represent what it means to be Singaporean.
I'm a freelance writer. In recent years, as I become more interested to delve deeper into my Singaporean identity, I've made a conscious effort to look into articles that I could write on about Singapore. I've lived overseas for more than 10 years, first in Shanghai, China, for about 5 years, then in Hong Kong for about 3, and most recently, I was in Paris, France for about 5 years. We moved back to Singapore in 2018. I originally was supposed to be just in China for 2 years. So ever since then, as the years went, I felt guilty that I didn't come home as promised. I think I've been away for too long.
Je commence à couper. Je commence à couper.
And then you tell us which slice goes to which person, okay?
Alors, qui
Who
prend
gets
cette part?
this? Okay, Amma. The next one, Akong. I think coming back to Singapore, I was worried that the children would not be as connected to their French part of their identity.
Allez, tu viens et aujourd'hui, tu vas être la reine.
Wow. Yeah. My husband does regular video calls with his mother, together with the children. He speaks in French to them all the time. But it's going to be an issue for us all our lives, I think. If you're in France, I would be thinking about how they are not seeing their family in Singapore. When we were in Paris, Elna was still really young. So the little things I could do to make her feel rooted to Singapore was to create a connection with her family in Singapore.
找一找哪一只热气球是最高的热气球？
哪一个飞的？是吗？哪一只飞的最高？
I think 2 years on, being back in Singapore, it's exactly how I imagined it to be. Back home, everything's familiar. Maybe a bit different, but still familiar. Now, especially with the pandemic raging on, I'm happy that I'm home to be in a very secure and safe environment. I think it's human nature where you think about what you don't have. So being in Paris, I would think about how I wish to be back in Singapore. Now, being in Singapore, I would sometimes miss my time in Paris. Living in Paris, there's been moments where I've been unexpectedly reminded of home. In my neighborhood in Paris, 2 streets away, there's a small Asian grocery store run by Cambodian Teochews. So going to that store, I would hear people speak in Teochew, in Cantonese, and I'll also see Singaporean produce, soy sauce, sesame oil, even soybean milk. Living overseas, there were definitely times when I questioned what it means to be Singaporean. Even today back home, I'm still questioning that. To me, it's a work in progress. Being overseas, especially in France, I get stuck with assumptions that I'm Chinese and I'm from China. So then that makes me think more about what it means to be Singaporean and Chinese, and to explain to people that Chinese is just an ethnicity, but my nationality, that's Singaporean. I started writing as a freelance writer more than 10 years ago about life overseas for a young Singaporean. Today, I write about food, lifestyle, travel for local and international publications. Some of the challenges in writing local subjects to an international audience just means having to explain local terms, local names of food for people who have never been to Singapore or who have never heard of the food. There was one time when I was writing about Hainanese Western food that I realized for something that Singaporeans don't even question, I actually needed to explain the concept of Hainanese Western food to foreigners. That it's not just a Singapore-style Western food, but that there's also a history behind it, with the Hainanese chefs who used to work in British households and how they came out, opened their coffee shops, and started selling Western food that's adapted to local tastes with local ingredients. When I'm writing about local topics, I realize things that I thought I knew, actually sometimes I don't at all. And then by researching more into these local topics, I get to understand and find out more about Singapore. There was one time I wrote a piece on offal in French cuisine. People usually associate French cuisine with Boeuf Bourguignon or good wines. So I thought this would be a good piece to introduce to Singaporeans, the less known part of French cuisine. There's a dish called andouillette, which is sausage made of pig's small intestine. To me, the first time when I had it, it reminded me of kway chap. So in my article, I related andouillette with kway chap and how andouillette would probably taste a bit better with kway chap chili. There's also another dish called terrine de cochon de la tête aux pieds by a famous charcuterie in France. To me, when I had that, it reminded me of Teochew pork trotter. I would love to eat it with some Teochew chili garlic with vinegar. So in moments when I least expect it, suddenly Singapore hits me everywhere. There was a time I wrote about the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris from my perspective as a Singaporean living in Paris at that time. I've never been so close to violence and terrorism in my life. The place where the attackers left their getaway car was just about 10 minutes from where I lived, and then where the Charlie Hebdo officers were at, that's in a neighborhood that I would go to regularly. I think moments like that, you think about how you've taken safety, security in Singapore for granted. Things that we don't even think about.
Vas-y, accroche-toi sur le côté, et c'est bon. Maintenant, tu peux descendre si tu veux.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm also starting to explore Singapore more. We've been going to the park connectors and realized that I've never appreciated park connectors this much. It's great to go through Singapore on foot, through residential estates that I would never have a chance to go to or reason to go to, and then stop by for a coffee at a kopitiam.
Tu veux pas en voir un petit peu?
Since coming back home, I've realized that there are these small things in our life that we don't pay enough attention to, like the void decks, where so many important events in our lives take place in. I think common spaces like the void deck help a lot in shaping our Singaporean identity, at least to me. For instance, you have the Malays holding their weddings. There you have Chinese holding funerals and wakes. Then you have children of all ethnicities learning to cycle for the first time, play together. You know, it's a common space where different people come together, whether by chance or not, and it's part of our experience growing up in Singapore. Mixed them up until it became a special Singapore culture. What were different peoples on the island became one, and together they made a nation. Singapore. Yay! Anywhere you go in mix. I hope that through my writings, people could relate to the experiences I had and start to think more about the Singaporean identity, what it means to be Singaporean, that all these small, mundane experiences, small pieces of insignificant things are actually what makes us Singaporean. This exploration of the Singaporean identity is important to me. It's still a work in progress, but it's important because then if I have a better understanding of my own identity, I'll be able to pass it on to my children so that they could better understand their Singaporean identity.
So being Singaporean to me means being connected to your fondest experiences in a physical space. And for me, that's home, Singapore. It's where I had my first heartbreak, my first successes, and there's nowhere else I'd rather be.
No matter what our limitations, etc., we'll find a way to make things happen. Despite, all the differences and diversity, we come together and we find a way to move forward.
A Singaporean is someone with ties to Singapore, who is proud to represent Singapore, and who, in spite of all the daily gripes, is happy to call Singapore home.
It's nothing that you hold or possess. It is something that is within you. You have seen the country's progress. You have journeyed along the way. You have missed a certain part of the growth, but it doesn't leave you. It's still something that you carry with you within your heart.